identities. We're so thankful to these 4 UW-Madison alums who graciously volunteered to share their experiences with us studying abroad as students of color. So thank you, panelists, for your time and also for your wisdom today and for sharing those with current students. I also want to give special thanks to the Multicultural Student Center for co-sponsoring this event, and also to my colleague and co-coordinator Amani DeHolton from the International Internships Program, who has done an immense amount of work to help co-coordinate this panel today. So thank you, Amani, for that. I want to highlight a couple events, or more than a couple, that are coming up during the rest of Study Abroad Week. So you can see those listed on the slide right now. There's Study Abroad Advising from 1 to 3 p.m. today, that's drop-in. There's also a funding study abroad info session, so learning about how to finance, and that's at 3 p.m. today. Tomorrow at 11 a.m., there is a Study Abroad 101 presentation, so just giving you the basics on what you need to know to start planning for a study abroad experience. And then finally, there is a Launching Your International Career event from 12 to 1 p.m. tomorrow. There are a lot more events that you can find on our website on the full calendar of Study Abroad Week. All right. As always, you can always visit our website and get more information there. You can always set up an advising appointment as well with a study abroad advisor if you would like to learn more. So the outline for our panel today is we will start with some quick introductions. Each panelist will talk a little bit about themselves and the program that they went on. Then we will have a series of moderated questions that the panelists will address. And then finally, it will take questions from the audience. So please go ahead and use the Q&A box to submit any questions. You can submit those throughout the session or at the end, but we won't be addressing them until the last 10 minutes or so. All right, and with that, we will go ahead and start our first introduction. Oscar, if you want to take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Oscar Juarez. So I graduated in 2017 from UW-Madison. I was studying electrical engineering and computer science. And then I went on the Hangzhou, China study abroad program. So it was over the summer. The reason I chose this program was because it counted towards my degree. So it had the technical communications class, Mandarin, and thermodynamics that I took that all applied towards my degree. So I was looking to do something that wouldn't delay my graduation. So I was based out of Hangzhou, but pretty much we were doing 4 school days a week. And then after that, we were just traveling a lot. So the top left there, you can see I'm at the Great Wall of China, which I thought was pretty cool. And then we went to Shanghai, which is the bottom left. And then the middle pictures, that was just some good friends that I made abroad. So I didn't know anyone going into this trip. It was pretty much just me, and none of my close friends wanted to go along, but I really wanted to do study abroad anyway. So I actually made some really good friends, and we still keep in touch with these guys, which is awesome. And then I think my most unique experience while I was there is the bottom right. We got invited to go to like a game show, talk show type thing in China, and we got to sit front row just because we were foreign. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Thanks, Oscar.
Hi, my name is Valeria. I also graduated in 2017. I took a few years working, and now I'm back at UW. I'm a first-year law student. So I went, primarily the program was in Jordan. It was SIT, School for International Training, and the program was about refugees, health, and humanitarian action. There was an excursion to Switzerland to learn from UN officials and different international and non-governmental organizations about their aid and their work helping migrants across the world. So I got to travel a little bit too as well. Quite a little bit of a different experience than I think a lot of people study abroad, because it was very academic. A lot of times you hear people going to Europe and they visit a new country every week, and it's a lot of fun, which it was fun, but it was also very academic, and I did a lot of papers and a lot of research. I posted a picture of one of my favorite foods, which is masahan. It's actually traditionally a Palestinian dish, but since so much of the Jordanian population are Palestinians as well, a lot of the national dishes are also Palestinian. Yeah.
Thanks, Valeria.
Hello, my name is Kat Bonded. I also graduated in 2017. I studied bio Spanish and a global health certificate, and also was a Mercillo J. Lee Scholar. I did the Santiago, Chile CIE liberal arts program. There's also a business school program, but for the program that I did, we had to have at least like, I think either third or fifth semester Spanish, something like that. Right now, I am a third year medical student doing my MD MPH, still at Madison. I think I'm a lifer now, they call it. Similar to Valeria, like my program, I studied a lot because I was finishing a lot of my Spanish, like my Spanish electives in Chile. So I, compared to like my other friends who maybe went to like Spain, like I was taking classes, I think 5 days a week and studying a lot. But some cool highlights were like, if you are really into the outdoors, Chile is super accessible and just beautiful. And so in the top left, we went sandboarding in the Atacama Desert. And that was one of the excursions included in your CIE program. So we went as a group, and that's, I think, the driest desert in the world. Top right photo, that is from one of the most like hiked places in Santiago. It's like right outside the city, and it's just beautiful. You can see the Andes, and it's just awesome. And then the bottom is like my own personal last trip, as I saved going to the Patagonia at the very end and did a little bit of hiking and stuff. So a lot of fun.
Thanks, Kat.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I graduated in May of 2019. I am currently back at UW, getting a master's and eventually PhD in epidemiology. I went to Thailand back in 2018 just for the summer. It was a 5-degree, like it was counting towards my degree. I went with other UW students, and yeah, we were only there for like 2.5 months, so we didn't do that much traveling, but we did get to go to some of the islands around Thailand, and that was really fun. But most of it was a little bit of research and a lot of studying.
Thanks, Lauren. All right, so these are our 4 panelists. Just in case you're just joining us, we are very happy to have Oscar, Valeria, Kat, and Lauren, who all studied abroad in very different places, but within the past 5 years or so. And we're gonna go ahead and move into some moderated questions now, but please feel free, if you have your own questions, you can start submitting those in the Q&A box, and we will address those later in the panel. All right, so panelists, I'm gonna ask a question and then I will call on you just so that you kind of know, it's your turn to give an answer. If you don't want to address a question, that's totally fine. You can just pass, but I'll give each of you a chance to address questions. All right, so first question. What were you expecting from your study abroad experience, and what was the reality? Were you surprised in any way? So let's start with Oscar.
Yeah, so I think going into it, the mindset was like, going to a different country, it'll be kind of like a big vacation. I guess I was just looking at the fun part of it. And I think it turned out to be a lot more eye-opening, just like personally, and like learning about a different culture. So being Hispanic, I grew up here in the US. So like I was exposed to like American culture, and then it feels like the other culture here is like the Hispanic culture, but that was just at my house. So this was truly the first time I got to go somewhere else and like see a different culture and learn different etiquette and truly feel like I would say a foreigner. So I thought that was very surprising. Like, and I was surprised to learn especially in China, we had a lot of students coming over from China at UW. So it was cool to kind of understand where why they did some of the things they did, and see what their home was like. So I thought it was awesome.
That's great. Thank you. Valeria.
I expected, I guess a tip I would have for people that are interested in abroad is really research your program. And if you can connect with alumni to see what it was like, do it. By no means do I regret my experience, but I did think that I went in thinking it was going to be a bit more immersive. I thought my Arabic was going to get 10 times better. It wasn't. 8 hours of the day I was with other American students speaking English. I did stay with the host family, which I thought it was a great experience. I love my host family. We still keep in touch. I really miss my host siblings. But since my host parents also spoke English, my Arabic didn't necessarily excel because it's so much easier to communicate in the language that we all know. So if you're looking for something that is language intensive, I guess just research what programs you're looking into and make sure that fits your goals. And then I would say, since I wasn't expecting to be around American students so much, I kind of, it still felt like we were in a foreign country, but it still felt like an American college experience. I wasn't anticipating it to be like that. I thought it would be a little bit more, you're on your own in a new country, on your own, figure stuff out, but it was actually very regimented. And so many people spoke English. So I would just say research the program, going into it, knowing what you want out of it.
Thanks, Valeria. Kat?
I guess I forgot to mention, so I was in Chile for my spring semester of my junior year. So I got to stay there for like my 4 months of class, and then I stayed for the summer to like boop around and hang out with people and stuff. What I was expecting going in was like, I'd like been taking Spanish since I was like 13, and I went when I was like 21, and I was like, oh, I feel pretty good about my Spanish. Like I took this semester Spanish at Madison, like I'm fine. And I just had this like rude awakening call, which is good because my goal going abroad was to like become fluent in Spanish. And I think my time in Chile exceeded those expectations, because like something that I looked for in a program is like, I wanted a really immersive experience, and I lived with a host family. I took all my classes with like Chilean students and stuff, and it's like it was very much so like I thought we'd be even more immersed, and I was surprised how much. I guess we got some hand holding in the beginning in terms of how to choose classes and stuff. But I would say those academic expectations were exceeded, and I was challenged. Like I think that was probably one of my hardest semesters at UW, like as a pre-med student or whatever. But I was kind of, it exceeded my expectations in a good way, because I feel like I really didn't go in with many expectations. And we can touch on some like the cultural stuff about just being in a foreign country. But like it was kind of one of the first times where I felt like I blended in with people and felt like less of a foreigner, which was kind of cool, because like the white students in my program like felt like they were stared at a lot. But for once, if I like rode the metro or the bus to school, I could just like stick my head in a book and I would never get looked at, which is like a nice change to blend in for a little bit.
Thanks, Kat. Lauren?
I guess I kind of got everything I was expecting. I knew it was going to be a short period, so I was expecting a lot of work, and a lot of work we had. The only thing that I expected is, since I was going to a university in Thailand, was more students, but they were also on their break. So most of the time it was like I made some friends in the university there, but it was very like there weren't that many students around. So I would just say, if you are planning to become friends with a bunch of people, just like research like when is their summer break, because yeah, that was a surprise for me.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I think this is really interesting, because I would say anyone who's studied abroad will attest to the fact that almost anytime you go into a program, that you might meet some of your expectations with, or meet some of the goals you had going in, but there's always going to be things that surprise you, and maybe you don't achieve a certain goal that you originally had, but then also sometimes you end up achieving something that you never would have dreamed of before you went. So it's in the end, it's going to be a surprise either way. And that's sort of, I think, part of the challenge, but also the joy of going abroad. And there's so many different kinds of programs. Each of these programs are very, very different from each other in terms of who you're taking your classes with, who's teaching your classes. If it's extra immersive, like Kat's, where they were expected to speak in Spanish, and interact with local students in all their classes, versus a program like Oscar's or Lauren's, where you're really traveling with a group of American students led by a UW faculty member, versus Valeria's program, where there was a center where she was taking classes and she was living with a host family, but also her classes were with other American students. So as you can see, there's a big variety of experiences, and it sounds like the advice is do your research beforehand so you can really try to pick a program that matches what it is you're looking for. Great. Well, next question is, what kind of preparation did you find helpful as you planned for your experience abroad? So let's switch up the order. Let's start with Kat.
I don't think I prepared much of anything, to be honest with you. Like, I think it's kind of fun to go in blind. I mean, I researched like what common foods they eat in there, like what my diet would be like, you know, and what kind of social norms and cultural expectations are there in terms of, you know, and it's something that I didn't know prior to going. Was like Chile is a particularly like very Catholic dominated culture, and in addition to that, interestingly, their economic system is like also pretty neoliberal. So it's similar to the United States in that way, just like lagging maybe like 10 years behind. But I feel like I didn't really do a ton of research aside from like the kind of standard stuff they put on a website. I'm like, oh, you know, if my deciding factor is like, how much is it going to cost, and will I live with a host family? Which I lived with a host family, and she was like wonderful and lovely. So that was kind of the extent of, and I researched places I wanted to visit at some point and what that would cost, just because I think a lot of us do study abroad because we are curious about the external world and maybe a certain historical site or place. I mean, I'm really into hiking and backpacking, so that's why Chile was a draw for me. But my kind of thing is because I was deciding between Chile, Argentina, and Peru, knowing I wanted to go to South America. But my breaking thing was the fact that I could choose to be in classes with Native students, and the fact I'd live with host family, and that there was just so much cool nature in the country. So I think doing that basic research in terms of knowing the landscape of what you're dealing with in terms of social and economic and also historical is nice too, to have that context. But I don't think it's required, because I do think it's almost more fun to go in and not know, so you're not blinded by your own biases by how we teach whatever American history about your country, unless you already have a huge background in it, whatever. But I really didn't know a lot about Chile going in. I feel like it was cool to learn more from like their perspective than whatever we teach here.
Thanks, Kat. Let's go to Valeria.
So I also didn't do any formal preparation, but I just in general had a political interest in the Middle East, and I had a lot of Arab friends, and my roommate and best friend, she's Muslim. I lived with her for 4 years. So I kind of went into it kind of already knowing the culture and knowing a lot. It wasn't a formal preparation, but it definitely did help. But I mean, I also don't have any dietary restrictions. I'm a foodie. I'll try anything. I'm very open-minded. So I think if you fall under one of those categories that, like, say you have some kind of sensitivity, or there's something special you need, I would just say, like, reach out to the program directors and leaders and how they could accommodate you. But yeah, I think I also blended in. Like, no one there thought that I was not Arab. So it helped a lot. Kind of like what Kat was saying, how it's like for once you get to blend in. I think as students of color on a predominantly white campus, I think we're at a better position to study abroad because we already know what it feels like to not quite belong. And we know how to address those conversations or those situations where you might feel like, oh, I'm the odd one out. Whereas I feel like some of my like white peers kind of struggled with that. So I think just by being a person of color here at UW-Madison, you're kind of already in a better position mentally and emotionally to study abroad than some of your white peers.
That was amazing, Valeria. And I 100% agree from my abroad experiences too. I would say in some ways it's just part of being alive as a person of color in the US is you stick out and people have questions. So experiencing that abroad, it doesn't throw you in the same way. And then sometimes, yeah, when you end up blending in, it's kind of shocking almost. You're like, whoa, no one's staring at me, you know, which can be kind of empowering too. All right, let's go to Oscar.
Yeah, so I would say my program, I guess maybe was a little more structured. So I think the faculty, it's only like 2 or 3 of them that go, and they alternate years, so it's not their first rodeo. So they're pretty good about like kind of giving you what you need to know. You know, so I think they did like 2 or 3 sessions before we left, on telling you, you know, like kind of like cultural training and like what to pack, or, you know, good suggestions from years in the past. So I actually really like that. So then, you know, I kind of took all my like the work out of it for me. And then we also took like a few like lessons of Mandarin, which, I mean, I had 0 Mandarin background. So I guess that was helpful. I know some people are usually fearful about not knowing the language, but I mean, I went into it pretty much blind as far as that goes, and I survived, and it was a lot of fun. But I would say like my one piece of suggestion for like traveling or for planning is like kind of look at your travel beforehand, like start understanding, you know, what costs are, because it's kind of nice when you show up and then you're just kind of running the motions instead of having to like sit down and like prep, because then that'll just waste your time abroad, it felt like. So like I said, I met some of these guys at these info sessions, so like a lot of us had trips planned out, you know, before we even got there, so it was kind of nice to just, you know, show up and then be ready to go.
Nice. Thanks, Oscar. And then last but not least, Lauren. I promise you'll be first in the next round, Lauren.
Oh, great. What did I do? So I went with a professor called John Roll, and he had a lot of meetings beforehand. And I went to every single one of them. He called them like pizza parties, and like we got to go and like ask him questions, because he's been to Thailand a bunch of times. He really prepared us for the experience, and you know, I took my questions there. So if your program has something like that, like a meeting, it was only once a month, like for the spring semester before the summer that I went. So I only had to go 4 times. So if your program has something like that, by all means go. The other thing that I did to prepare was try to figure out how much I was going to spend per day. That's just because I'm very I'm super detail oriented, so I wanted to know exactly how much I was going to spend each day, because I was paying for it by myself, so I had to go at like a part-time job during the spring so that I can afford my experience in Thailand. The great thing about Thailand is that once you're there, it's super cheap to live there. So I highly recommend going to Thailand whenever you can, even if it's not to study.
Thanks, Lauren. I love this. I love like the varying levels of preparation. And I like how some of it happened just more through life experiences, like Valeria, like having a roommate, you know, from the Middle East, like, or who is Muslim rather, like that can really kind of prepare you long-term for a future experience abroad, versus like really doing your research, like Oscar, like pre-planned trips of friends, which can be really beneficial, because then once again, you can kind of set out your expenses, know what you're doing. And versus, you know, sometimes though, I think in the end, you're going to have to learn on the fly. So like Kat's, you know, sort of like read up on the basics, but just be prepared to go and embrace the experience in the moment. I think especially on a longer experience, like if you're going for a full semester, I think that sometimes is the way to go, because you're going to discover what you want to do while you're there. But sometimes on a shorter program, it can be really beneficial to do so that you're really taking advantage of your time abroad. Great. Well, our next question is, and if anyone ever needs me to repeat one, please just let me know. Our next question is, do you have a favorite memory or particularly meaningful experience from your time abroad? And as promised, I'm going to make Lauren go first.
I'd say our first day of class at Mae Phalawan University in Thailand. The students there like organized this like almost like a game day for us, so that we can immerse ourselves with the Thai students, and they let us have a buddy. So each person had like a buddy that would show them around and just help them in the university. And that whole day was really cool. Like they taught us how to make tea, and we play a bunch of games that Thai people play, and it was super fun. And it was right after classes, and I remember feeling very overwhelmed with all the work that we would have to do because we had assignments due like almost every day. And I was very overwhelmed with that. And just having that at the end of the day on our first day was amazing. It was really great.
Thanks, Lauren. Let's go to Kat.
So I have like two that came to mind. I think one is just like visiting the Patagonia in southern Chile. It's like it takes a while to get there, but once you're there, it's like honestly the most beautiful place I've ever visited in the world. But the more like meaningful, well, that was meaningful as in like, oh, like wow, inner joy, you know. But an interesting / memorable experience was like kind of towards the end of my semester, or like maybe like halfway through. There were a bunch of student protests being led because like the Chilean government promised to like reduce your free tuition, and they weren't following through. So students kind of took to the streets. And I remember like on that day of class, I didn't know protests were happening at the time, but like I remember I like biked everywhere when I was living there. And I remember arriving to class and there's just like puffs of smoke. And I'm like, why am I crying right now? And like I get to class and I'm like tearing up and tears just streaming down my face. I'm like, what just happened? And my professor's just sitting on his desk by himself. And he's just like, welcome to Chile. Like the protest just wrapped up. Because the police came and like they tear gas students pretty regularly. And it became so commonplace by the end of the semester. Like I remember going to like our campuses are kind of, it's like California temperatures. And so the campus is usually very nice and outdoor, kind of like, I don't know how you see these half outdoor schools in California or something, like there's no AC or heating. It's just like the same all the time. I remember by the end of the semester, I remember like going to the library, checking out a book for one of my papers. And then like, I look out the window and I just see like a group of students like running, and I see like police officers and like a little tear gas bomb flying through the air. And I'm like, the library looks at me, I look at her, and she's like, well, looks like it's time to go. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'll see you later. And it's just kind of interesting, like how, I don't know, the juxtaposition of how we compare like student / local protests in the United States and how experiencing that in Chile made it be like, oh, like it's interesting just how the government / responds to it or doesn't. So that was like memorable, and that was like something I'm like, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't tell like the study abroad office about this when I get back, but now I'm like, whatever. It's probably different now, but actually probably not, because they had just had like a bunch of protests pretty recently in the last year or so. Yeah, so that was like really fun and unique. But well, Rebecca, my concern was just like, oh my gosh, if I tell them, like they're not gonna let students go back to Chile because they're gonna be concerned about safety or whatever.
No, we're always sending students to Chile. We're just, we're advising that you do not go and join a protest, but
yeah, but you're like, we all do, we're like,
oh,
what's happening? It's like class and the office is downtown right by where the protests happen.
Yeah,
so we're just like,
you're gonna experience it whether you like to or not. It's just kind of part of life in Chile.
Yeah, so that was memorable and really fun. And like some students were very like, oh, I shouldn't, but then usually a group of friends and I'd be like, oh, we should at least go check it out. Like, and we can always bike away if things really go downhill or something. So that was really memorable and cool. Well, not cool. It's just memorable, not cool.
Those are some of the most memorable experiences, I think, are the ones that you don't expect. Like sometimes it's not like going to Cusco or going to the Eiffel Tower. It's these completely unplanned human experiences that kind of pull you in a way that you just, you can't plan for ahead of time. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of why studying abroad can be really impactful, is you're not just learning about what is it like, social movements or protest, or like what are the politics like in this country, but actually going and seeing it happen in front of your eyes can be, I mean, it's life-changing in that moment. So, all right. I feel like I'm losing track of who's talked. Who has not answered yet? Oscar, you haven't answered.
All right, so yeah, I guess I got two memories I'd like to share. So one of them was just like, I guess our coolest vacation. So we went to this like hotel, and then they just kind of drop you off at the bottom of the mountain. And you're like, where's the hotel? And they're like, well, it's like a 5-mile like hike up this mountain. So like, oh, all right. So I mean, you got a bag like you're packing up to show up to a hotel, but then you got to do this hike. So that was a little like, like surprising, and it was really rainy. And then like it's so high up that you get to this point where like you go through the clouds, and all of a sudden it's like sunny. And then the hotel was very nice at the top, but the unique part about it was that there's no roads up there. That's how you get dropped off at the bottom. And so all the supplies and things are brought up by porters. And so it's just like these guys with huge packs. And I guess they make this hike up like twice a day, like some of the good ones, I guess 3 times. and it's just like wild. It's like, wow, I can't believe like, and they I guess in that town, like they view that as like an honor. So like if their kid becomes a porter, then they're kind of like almost viewed as like superheroes type thing. And I mean, their calves are just huge. I've never seen calves like these. Like it was pretty cool. But I thought that was like a very unique experience. Like I was dead just doing it once, like one way up, and they were doing it up and down like 2 or maybe 3 times. So I thought that was a really cool experience. And I think that's a standard part of this trip. So I think you get to go see that if you go on, go to China. And then the second one is like, I feel like I got to a certain point where like, yeah, when you show up, you know, this program specifically, I think they try to do like something every 2 weeks that was like structured with like the big group. But other than that, you were kind of on your own. So in the meantime, I mean, we were studying alongside some Chinese students. So we were at Zhejiang University. And then, so we were doing some of like the more technical courses they took along with us. So it was nice to meet those guys. And then I think we got to a certain point where like we became good enough friends where like, you know, they took us off campus where it was kind of like more like westernized, and then you go more into like the true China. And I thought, you know, going to visit them at their house and meet their friends outside of school and stuff, I thought that's like when I really gained the most valuable experience. Like, you know, going to like, we went out to eat one time and it's like, all right, we're at this laundromat and it kind of looked like a hole in the wall. I was like, I don't know, it doesn't look the safest, but they served the best fish I had the whole time I was there. It was like above the laundromat. So that was pretty good. And then yeah, just seeing the true China, I think it comes along with just meeting the locals. And I think that's something that you should, or that was very memorable to me.
Thanks, Oscar. And then Valeria, I don't think you've gotten to share yet.
I don't think, yeah, no. So kind of similar to Kat, I also had a lot of nature experiences that are very memorable where you're just, one in particular, I was in the Jordanian desert called Wadi Rum. It's also really cool. If you Google it, it looks like Mars. They shot that Mars film with Matt Damon in it because the sand is like orange. It looks really cool. But we spent a night there with some Bedouin tribes, which are nomadic people, like I guess indigenous to the area. And in the middle of the night, you know, you step out and it's beautiful. You can see every single star. The sky is colorful with all the purples and the blues. It's beautiful. So definitely nature moments that are very memorable. Moments with my host family when I'm bonding with them and my little host brother. And then since my program was very heavily focused on migrant studies, some of my favorite moments were visiting refugee camps, meeting Syrians that the stories that they tell you are just, you can't forget them. There was a church near my host family's house that I would visit, and they were hosting this young woman who had just escaped from ISIS. She was like a forced child bride, and just speaking with her and her kind of telling me about her story. They're just things that you'll never forget. And ultimately, it's what led me to law school. I want to work for migrants and immigrants. So those stories have been memorable.
Wow, each of these memories are amazing. I want to comment on all of them, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to let people absorb them. So I thought actually Valeria's comment just now leads great into the next question. So how has your abroad experience affected your future goals or subsequent academic, professional, or personal trajectory? And let's start this time with Lauren.
So I actually, the whole, like, the name of the program is like microbiology and public health in northern Thailand. Well, I kind of went into it already being very interested in public health, and it's always what I've been wanting to do is go to school for epidemiology. But you know, we had to do like a little bit of research on how public health affected people in rural areas in Thailand. And I did my kind of paper thesis. It wasn't that long, on accidents in motorcycle in motorcycles in northern Thailand in the students, because everyone rides a motorcycle there, and and everyone where I was a student, so that's what I was doing. And what I found was pretty amazing, and it just really made me want to like pursue my career even more. But it really made me focus on rural populations. I've always been like very interested in minorities and underrepresented communities, but this really made me see it on another level, on a different country, and for a different group of people that I never usually even think about, because most of my research is on urban populations, and this really like, you know, just made me like even more interested in what I already wanted to do. So didn't really change it much.
Thanks, Lauren. Oscar.
So for me, I guess I would say it maybe in the future I might want to do some more work for like being inclusive and helping out with other cultures. But I think my biggest takeaway was like personally, so I've always been like a pretty outgoing guy and I like to travel. But again, I think it was more of like like the standard cookie cutter type vacations. And ever since I went on study abroad, and like I mentioned, I like hanging out with like the locals. I think ever since I went to China, I've been traveling even around the US, but like I like to stay off like the beaten path now and like kind of check out like what it would be like if I was a local in this area and doing things like that. And I think again, with what I mentioned earlier, that being Hispanic, I kind of knew what the Hispanic culture is like integrating in the US. And now that I've seen China, I understand that connection a little more. And while there's other cultures that I haven't been to, I understand there's another side. So I think just personally that's made me more inclusive, like at work, or like if there's coworkers of different backgrounds. I think usually I tend to be a guy that people like to come to and talk to, just because they kind of feel that I understand. And like I said, I don't specifically understand their specific experience, but I know there's another side, just like the three cultures I've been part of already. And I think that personally has helped me just opening my eyes to knowing that there's other things around.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I would say that for most people who study abroad, you come back and you, through osmosis, you kind of realize you've become more empathetic with people who don't maybe feel that they belong in a place, because sometimes, yeah, it's by not belonging that you come back and you want other people to feel like they belong. And I think as students of color, in some ways, you've always had to do that, especially, at a predominantly white institution. But once again, yeah, like going and experiencing it, I think in another country just reinforces that in a big way. So when you come back, it just makes you really want to embrace people who maybe don't feel like they fit in here. And I think that's just huge. Like it just makes you a better person. All right, let's go to you, Kat.
Can you repeat the question, Rebecca?
Yeah, I got to remind myself of it. Okay. How has your abroad experience affected your future goals or subsequent academic, professional, or personal trajectory?
Oh yeah. Okay. So in medical school now, so like going to medical school, I was like have always been someone who wanted to be a physician or whatever. Both my parents are refugees from Laos back in the 80s and stuff. So my goal in doing medicine was always to like give back to a community that my family didn't necessarily have, or the kind give them the like medical support, that my community didn't necessarily have. And so in like middle school, I kind of realized like, there's not a huge need for Laotian. I mean, there is a need for Laotian speaking physicians, but in our country, there's a greater need for physicians who speak Spanish. And so like taking on the Spanish major, my goal is to become more fluent. So like my patients would feel more comfortable, because that's something that like turned my head to medicine when my grandparents would seek medical care. And like, it's not like having to talk through my mom is not always the best way to do that. But we have like interpreters and stuff, whatever. So going abroad kind of made me reframe things. Like I mean, my Spanish improved, sure, but then also just like living in a different culture and better understanding that outsider feeling that like maybe my parents kind of went through, or that people go through the US when trying to navigate our healthcare system or the legal system, or just like trying to enroll in classes and assimilate into a community. Like that takes time, and it kind of gives context to like kind of what some of my patients are going through now in a very like convoluted way, because they're going through a lot more than I had to as an abroad student, obviously. But something that kind of has shifted my framework is, instead of like thinking of things so hierarchically in like race or ethnicity. Like it's kind of, I feel like I frame things more of caste systems, because wherever you go, whether it's like Chile or I don't know, even to China, like the people might seem racially homogenous per the US definition of race, but then like regardless, there's just like these rigid caste systems, and you realize that like people are, you know, they're built so people stay in their place. And that's something I like to see a lot more now doing medicine. And right now it informed my goals in that I'm doing the urban medicine and public health program. So like I'm like doing a public health project, and I'm working with like one of the 2 refugee intaking clinics in Milwaukee for my project over the next like 3 years. So it kind of, I don't know if it changed my professional goals as much as it expanded my view of them and kind of reinforced what I knew I wanted to do. It kind of just gave more lived experience of how to go about that and how to be more conscious of people's other lived experiences. Because it, like, interestingly enough, when I did live in Chile, yeah, I interacted with Chilean international students, but we also interacted with a lot of other international students aside from American students, which is fun too, to get to know them and hear their perspective of South America and the United States in the context of living in South America together in a serendipitous encounter. So, yeah.
That was great. Thanks, Kat. And Valeria.
So I came to UW knowing that I wanted to study psychology. I thought I was going to be a neuroscientist. And then I got weeded out at chemistry. I could not keep up. So I started focusing more on like interpersonal psychology, and I worked at the intergroup and prejudice and intergroup relations lab with Patricia Devine. So since my study abroad program, well, in that lab, we did a lot of research on biases, racial, gender, different types of biases. And so when I went to the study abroad program, I knew that they had a research component to it. I went there and I did an independent research project looking at discrimination faced by Syrian refugees in Syria. And I was kind of wondering, like, they're all Arabs. Do they even discriminate against each other? Like, they're the same race. And like, in my American view, that's what I was thinking, right? And kind of, yeah, it's just, and they were telling me stories of like, oh yeah, the Jordanians don't want us here. And they were saying things that were so similar to what I've heard Americans say about Mexicans, and my family is Mexican. And it was mind blowing. Like, this happens here too, really? Like, they think you're stealing jobs. They think that you're it was mind blowing. And so I started getting more aggravated, not about the discrimination, but more on like, they have no power against this. They can't do anything about it. So I would say my study abroad experience kind of really pushed me towards the legal aspect of migrant struggles versus the more psychological stuff. I knew I didn't want to be a therapist, so I kind of went the legal route. And then just seeing all the work that the different nonprofits did at the refugee camps and even outside of refugee camps, they're operating under like legal frameworks that may not exist. And I was just thinking, like, what can the international community do to empower groups that support migrants around the world? And just kind of connecting with my own family history of migration, with my family being Mexican immigrants. It felt like I found my place in the world through that study abroad program. I kind of solidified my goal of wanting to help migrants on a legal aspect. After graduation, I ended up working for an immigration law firm, and we did a lot of humanitarian cases and family-based immigration, and I absolutely loved it. So I realized that's my place in the world. I want to be an attorney. I want to help domestically immigrants here in the US, but then also abroad with the migrant struggles, not just in the Middle East, but at the border, all over. So it definitely affected the trajectory of my life, without doubt.
Thank you to all 4 of you. I loved every answer. So I have a few more questions. I do want our audience, though, if anyone has questions, please go ahead and start submitting those to the Q&A box. But if I don't see any, I'm going to keep asking them because I have a lot of questions. So
think she froze.
Abroad, and conversely, how is your identity would like to?
Sorry, Rebecca, can you repeat that? I think you froze up there for a little bit.
Oh no, my internet is really weird in here. Okay, so all of you have touched on this somewhat in your answers already, but how did your identity affect your time abroad? And conversely, how is your identity challenged or reshaped by your time abroad? And I'm going to kind of just allow people to answer this, you know, as they would like to. So go ahead and unmute if you would like to.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat your question one more time? I think it cut off on my end. Sorry.
All right. How did your identity affect your time abroad? And conversely, how is your identity challenged or reshaped by your time abroad? Oh, and Amani threw it in the chat too. And it looked like Kat had unmuted. So Kat, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was gonna say kind of similarly to what Valeria had already touched on, was the fact that like in the United States, I think we tend to homogenize, like we homogenize the whole Hispanic Latinx race. But even in Chile, it challenged the kind of my perceptions too, in the same way, like when I told people I was from the United States and they're like, you know, gave me like, 'cause I'm not a white person, right? Like their concept of what an a US citizen looks like is a white person. And it made me have to like approach those conversations a lot differently than how I feel when I get triggered in the United States when someone, you know, when a patient asks, so where are you from, you know? And in the same way that even in Chile, like immense colorism exists. And it's interesting too, because like something that challenged just my views and like, I guess, perceptions of the fact that like a lot of like Chilean people really prize westernized beauty standards. And like women who are typically brunette, like dye their hair blonde, and those are typically like the women of upper class, at least when I went to like the private Catholic university or whatever. And then on the other end, like, and then they frowned upon the indigenous Mapuche people. And it was just so interesting to unpack that and how those same caste systems and social hierarchies exist, just in a different flavor, you know, in just the hemisphere below us. And I don't know, I feel like it changed how I carry my own identity when I come back to, in terms of just thinking about the ways that like Asian Americans are homogenized pretty much, and people don't even know where Laos is on a map, right? Like it's interesting because now I feel like I almost give people a little bit more grace, or I feel like I have more patience with it now because we're all living in respective islands. But studying abroad makes me wish I had more time on this planet to like learn more about the different cultures that exist here.
Yeah, I think for me, so again, I grew up here, but I moved to the US when I was 6 from Guatemala. And I grew up in, I mean, I think I was the only Hispanic guy in our school district for like maybe a few years. So I think kind of growing up with that background, I was never like, or I would say like, it almost got to the point where like my friends were just kind of like, oh, that's just Oscar, he's different, but like no one really asked questions, I guess. And I kind of took that along, I guess, you know, as I grew up. So then I would say like, I never really talked about my culture or background per se, you know, even in like early college. And then when I went abroad, I noticed that when I was there, people were like, okay, they were asking, you know, questions of the foreigners. And then they're like, wait, you're even like foreign compared to these guys. And I guess just seeing how interested they were in me, like, you know, kind of was like, oh, this feels kind of cool. So like, I feel like when I got back, like, I kind of realized the questions they were asking. And then, you know, like even just from my friends now, like, I feel like I share more about my background and culture. And they're like, oh yeah, like we didn't know that about you. Like, I guess they just kind of assimilated me into just being from Nashville, Wisconsin, I guess. So it was kind of nice to like, I guess I would say that's something that was kind of unlocked within me, like being more open to talk about like my background and my culture as opposed to assimilating myself as like just like someone from the US, I guess.
I would say that I was in this program with a bunch of other people of color. We had someone from Ecuador, we had someone from Mexico, 2 people from like Northeast Asia, and like one girl from that was African American. And I was probably like one of the whitest people that went into this program in my group. And that's kind of how people saw me there. I moved here when I was 19 from Paraguay, and it was weird. Like I remember this one specific Thai student that was studying English in the university, and I was at a coffee shop one time, and all of a sudden she like taps me on my shoulder, and she's like, "Hey, can you help me with my English homework?" And I was with other American students. And I was like, sure, I can help you with your English homework, even though English is also my second language. And and I did. And I guess nobody ever asked me anything about me being from Paraguay. Everyone was always like, what is it like living in the States? And what was it like growing up there? And I didn't grow up here. So yeah, that was always a little weird for me. Yeah, I don't know. That's my answer.
For me, I would say I had to think about more what it meant to be American, because I can tell you my host family, when their host or their host program student, whatever host student was arriving at their house, they definitely weren't expecting someone that looked like me. They were expecting like a blonde, blue-eyed thing, and they're like, "You're American?" And then I explained, yeah, my parents and my siblings immigrated and were there. And so I think I helped show them a different part of America than what they're used to seeing in the media. Also, I studied abroad the fall of 2016, which was during the election in which Trump won. And so that stimulated a lot of questions from Jordanians on me, because then they knew I was Mexican American, and like they felt so terrible for me. And I think it made me kind of question, like, what does it really mean to be American overseas? Because people are thinking it's a different thing than what it actually is. And it was an interesting time to be in the Middle East, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think this is just it's so interesting, because I feel like everyone has a unique experience abroad, but I think as a student of color, yeah, you get just the mixing up of identities and like people's perception of who you are and who Americans are. And I feel like it makes you question, like, well, what is it to be American? What is it to be me? Maybe I'm not totally American. And I feel like for me, I had a similar experience because I'm half Korean and half white. And so I felt like my school was not very diverse. So like people sort of were like, oh, we'll just treat you like a white person. Like we'll just overlook the fact that you're not totally white. And then when I went abroad, similarly, people would ask where I was from, I'm from the US, and they go, but where are you really from? And I was like, oh, it's like I never left. It's, it's sort of like, and you have to explain, where you're from and who you are. And, people would always assume I was Chinese, because in Latin America, that not everywhere, but in certain Latin American countries, Chinese just means all Asian people. So I'd have to explain, no, my mother's from Korea. She came to the States. But I think in my best moments, it was sort of like a learning experience, both for me and also like in some ways like a sharing experience where I could like teach others about, my culture. But yeah, it's hard. It's in those moments, I think it can be kind of confusing and you're not sure how to address it. But I think if you can think about it before you go, sometimes I think that is a really helpful way to prepare to go abroad. It's just like, what am I going to do if someone questions the fact that I'm American, or maybe like Lauren assumes grew up in the US because maybe I look white, but in fact, I'm an international student too, or was. So yeah, we only have a couple more minutes, but it looks like we have a question in the chat from Holly. So it says, as someone who briefs first gen and underrepresented students,
Sorry, I think we lost Rebecca again for a second, but hopefully you can all see the question in the chat.
Advisors had told you before going abroad.
Sorry, Rebecca, we lost you for a second there, but I think everyone can see the question in the chat of
Yes, sorry, I was just reading that question and seeing whether anyone wanted to address it.
I guess I can start. I kind of mentioned this earlier about I wasn't expecting for me to spend so much time with American students. I thought it was going to be more immersive. So with that, I guess I don't know if an advisor could have advised me of this, more so like a student that went through the program, but I would have liked to know ahead of time, probably, so I can prepare myself, that the issues that you face on campus as a student of color don't go away when you are in a program where you're with other American students. It's the same stuff in a little microcosm. You'll still see all the microaggressions, all of that stuff. And it makes no sense, because it's like, if you came to the Middle East, you'd think you'd be open-minded, you'd understand like some things about Islam, you wouldn't be prejudiced, but no, American students are still American students. So I think I would have liked to have a heads up that like, it wasn't gonna be a break from some of the not so nice things you experience at like UW-Madison.
I'll go off of that too. And that's something I didn't realize that I wish my advisor would have told me, in terms of like, if you're like a first gen student who like is working jobs during your semester and stuff, like something that really stuck out to me I wish I'd known is like, yeah, I was primarily with white, relatively affluent students, because people like planning all these trips, and I'm like, oh my God, where are they getting all this money to plan trips and go on vacation like every month? And just kind of that disparity is stark when like you, at least for, even though I was going on a longer program, but sometimes declining a trip and feeling like you're not able to make most of that isn't something to be ignored either, because it does take like, I feel like to study abroad is a huge privilege financially to do. And like, I wasn't prepared for how much I wanted to do and how rich, frankly, some of my fellow American students were, because it wasn't just students from UW, like it was a program with like 30 of us from like different universities all across the country. So was not prepared to be the minority and coming from like a public school even.
Yeah, for me, like to build on Kat's point, yeah, that was huge. I guess that kind of triggered the memory in my mind. It's like, yeah, it was tough planning those trips, like kind of being at a financial deficit. And I guess to me, also like maybe some more information, like pitching to my parents, or like maybe having a nice pamphlet on like that this trip is not just like a vacation. It's like actually like it'll help you academically, or it can build on academics. Because I had to go to my parents and be like, hey, can I do this? And they're like, well, that's just a vacation. Like, why would we pay for that type thing? Or help you pay for something like that. So I guess having a nice like one pager would have been nice to be like, hey, mom and dad, here's like how this kind of fits into my program. Or advisors, like being able to point out how it would benefit your degree, I guess.
I would say for me is don't be afraid to just do things by yourself. Obviously, don't go in a sketchy neighborhood and like go in an alley on a restaurant by yourself. But I would say like, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, I love you guys, but most of the students that I travel with were not open-minded about the food. They just wanted to have their burgers. They wanted to have like Americanized food, and I was all about like, like trying weird stuff. Like this is the first time I tried worms, for example, and I had no issue like eating whatever. They just didn't want to do that, and sometimes I just had to be okay with like going by myself or going with like one person instead of going with the whole group. So yeah, just like don't be afraid to like do things that you want to do. I wish that's something that someone had told me, definitely, like maybe someone that had gone before me, because I always felt kind of bad. Like I was experiencing like a lot of FOMO sometimes because I wasn't doing, like, fear of missing out with the other people, because I didn't always want to go to the restaurants they wanted to go to and stuff. So.
Well, thank you all. We really appreciate your time. We once again are just so grateful that you were willing to share your experiences with us and with current students. And because this panel is recorded, this is going to be a potential future resource for other students. And these are all great ideas for our study abroad team to think about how we can better prep students and create resources for them. So once again, I just want to make a big thank you to all of our panelists and to the MSC today for co-sponsoring this. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Rebecca. Bye.